Well, Bungie have done it. Power creep personified, mint retrograde. This weapon is to the entire game what the initial release of rocket assisted sidearms were to the original game. That being, they just introduced a best in slot option without any consideration. Besides ammo economy, this thing is arguably the best primary slash kinetic weapon in the entire game. Nothing is beating this in terms of nothing is beating this in terms of damage, quick killing. Right, the only thing you're not going to be using this for is boss damage. But even then, there are use cases to shoot bosses with this thing, but if you have a champion that needs to die, mint retrograde. If you have an elite that needs to die, mint retrograde. If you have a bunch of red bars that need to die, mint retrograde. As long as you have ammo for this thing, there really is no reason to be using anything else. And I think that they couldn't have made a more perfect weapon even if they tried. It combines everything I love about this game, pulse rifles and rocket sidearms, into one convenient package. Starting off with what's good and what's bad on this weapon, there are very few actual bad rolls on Mint Retrograde. There's ways to intentionally make this weapon unoptimal. I'm going to be going over most of what I consider the good rolls to be, and a lot of what I consider to be not the best, but still usable. Now, the UI is a little bit broken right now. There are not this many perks in the magazine and the barrel section because it is a pulse rifle grenade launcher combo. It's taken all of the options from both of those and putting it together. But what you really want to be maximizing on Mint Retrograde is your velocity and your handling. Now, I know that the blast radius says 72. However, this is a lie. It does not have a blast radius even anywhere close to 72. This thing feels like by default it's firing implosion rounds, and you can also put implosion rounds on it. Now, the actual blast radius of this thing is so small that most people, or a lot of people rather, consider using chain handling just to improve the splash damage of this thing. But it's inappropriate to be treating Min Retrograde like it needs to have a big blast radius like a grenade launcher. It's more important to treat this like a direct impact. You just shoot the rounds and it hits the target, and the explosion comes secondary. It's a pulse rifle first, but it just so happens to shoot rockets. That being said, you would want to maximize your velocity and your handling for that, because this thing at its base has really low handling. Its reload speed also kind of sucks, but there are things that you can do to improve that. So for my barrel, I'm taking either quick launch or smart drift control. You can't go wrong with either of these. With smart drift control, you increase your recoil direction by 15 points, bringing it more towards a vertical up and down recoil. But the recoil on this thing without smart drift control really isn't that bad, especially if you're using a perk I'll talk about later. But quick launch is what's going to get you the most velocity and the most handling with the least downsides. Now, onto the magazines. It's important to consider that you have regular magazines and you also have the explosive magazines, so there's a lot you can do with this gun. There was, for a brief moment, when I thought that maximizing magazine size was going to be the truth, but your standard Mint Retrograde without any magazines is going to have 5 rockets, period. It's just gonna have 5 rockets. You're getting 6 if you put in an appended mag, or any +1 magazine increase, or any +2 magazine increase, rather. It's only going to be giving you +1 to the magazine. You can also put on a backup mag mod if you really want to. It just depends on what type of magazine, on if you're going to be getting 7 or 8 rounds, because these things are percentage based whenever they give you more ammo. Now, because I don't think it's that necessary to be getting an extra magazine slot, this is like where I can really see the most disagreement being had. I prefer something like alloy magazine or another perk like high velocity rounds, just to get the increased real speed and to get the increased velocity. But it's really just your personal preference on what you think you're going to want in the magazine. If you want to squeeze out a tiny bit more damage, you can be using implosion rounds, but I do feel that having something like high velocity or having an alloy magazine or pendant mag, you can really do anything you want with this second column. I wouldn't throw away a roll just because it has high explosive ordnance, even though blast radius is probably the least useful stat on the market. I can see a lot of arguments for all of them. Now, moving on to the actual third and fourth column, because it's impossible. It is impossible to discuss Mint Retrograde without talking about roles in its totality. You can't just pick and choose like I was doing for column 1 and column 2. Starting off, what I think is going to be the best role for most people in most activities. Now, if someone says, "Oh, I got the god roll," or "That isn't a god roll," there's like 9 of them. There's like 9 very, very good rolls on this thing. There's an incredible combination of perks here. All of them have potential. It's just how are you going to be able to access that? Now, what I feel is the best perk combination for the most people is going to be rewind rounds and elemental honing. Now, for starters, elemental honing is simply the best damage option in perk column 3. It's better than bait and switch because you're able to put away and take out your gun again, and you can extend it for a incredibly long time if you're actually managing your elemental damage types effectively, that being on either prismatic, getting all your damage types at once, or on any of your traditional subclasses, getting 4 damage types. Either way, you're going to be getting the same damage bonus as long as you're playing smart, that being 30% on a non-prismatic subclass, or your 40%, or I'm sorry, or your 35% on a prismatic subclass if you're able to get 5 stacks. 20 seconds of increased damage that you can put your gun away and take it out is a ridiculous amount, especially when you have rewind rounds. Now, rewind rounds is really only going to be applicable if you're just mag dumping a boss and you need that sustained DPS, because pretty much nothing in the game currently can withstand a 5x elemental honing for more than 1 full magazine of Mint Retrograde. So unless you're shooting a raid boss, rewind rounds is just like a tiny bit better for more sustained damage. Me personally, I prefer beacon rounds. Beacon rounds just for ease of access, having the tracking, having the increased ammo cone. I'm zipping and zooming across the battlefield with my hunter build this season, and beacon rounds makes it so easy to hit every single shot. Not to mention, you also get increases to your reload speed with beacon rounds. You're getting a plus 15 to your base stat, and you're also getting a 0.9 times to your reload duration multiplier. That meaning you're going to be reloading 10% faster on top of your increased reload speed stat whenever beacon rounds is active. And obviously, your 45% increased auto aim cone size. It's just so your rounds are going to be tracking onto your enemies more effectively. This is my preferred role, beacon rounds, elemental honing. I think that most people are going to gravitate towards rewind rounds, and they're going to think it's the best. True capital G goobers are going to say, get Envious Arsenal and use this thing as part of a damage rotation, which is true, but it kind of gets to a point where if you're using Mint Retrograde for damage, I mean, you can combine it with something like a Hezen's Vengeance, Envious Arsenal, Elemental Honing times 5. You get that with your Hezen's Vengeance in at the same time. It's going to be pretty nasty for damage rotations, but the damage rotations currently that you need Hezen's Vengeance for, the period of time that you have to damage the boss, like things like the Witness or whatever, it just really isn't enough time to be able to take full advantage of Mint Retrograde, but I could definitely see an argument for people taking Elemental Envious Arsenal into into the server for any of that high-end activity. Now, another interesting role that I was experimenting with a little was Recycled Energy and Slice. Now, it definitely is not the best. It lags in damage compared to any of your roles with Elemental Honing or Master of Arms or even One for All. Even One for All. It's just not the best. However, the ability to chain class abilities and to get a whole bunch of new ability energy back with Recycled Energy, it feels good enough when I was using it that I could justify taking it into an activity just for trash mobs, but severing an opponent is not the most useful thing. There are many ways to exhaust. There's many ways to get a anti-damage buff, debuff, I guess you can call it, on an enemy besides Slice. But Slice, it does add up for a little bit of extra damage, maybe for champion killing, I guess. But I don't think Recycled Energy and Slice as a role is something that you can go wrong with. Now, something that you actually can go wrong with, Stats for All, One for All. I know what you're saying. Oh, you're getting a whole bunch of stats from both Stats for All, and you're getting the 35% increased damage for One for All. Mint Retrograde has issues with, multi-targeting if you're not using beacon rounds. I mean, sure, if you are cracked, you can certainly just spray the battlefield, hit 3 targets, and you're getting your 35% increased damage from one for all, which is the same as the 5x Element Honing, but you're only getting it for 10 seconds. And your stats for all, you're going to be getting a lot of bonus stats. The biggest issue with this combination is that it can't refresh itself while you're using it. So something like Element Honing, when you go from 4x stacks to 5x stacks, you're basically going to be getting 40 seconds of 30% and above increased damage. Stats for all, again, it's just one of those you pretty much can't go wrong with. Same thing if you're looking at Master of Arms for like a shot swapping build, right? You're using Master of Arms and I don't know, just throwing hatchling on there just for the hell of it. Whenever you get your first kill with another weapon and then you switch back to Min Retrograde and get your second kill with it, you're gonna get a 25% increased damage, but it only lasts for 4 seconds. So again, it's one of those things where you have to consider the fact that Element of Honing is the best damage perk on this weapon as long as you are able to actually get all of your damage types off at the same time. But if you're not able to get all of your damage types off at the same time, it may not be a bad idea to consider Master of Arms or to consider One for All. I much prefer Master of Arms in, Crucible, and I much prefer One for All in areas that's not Crucible if I'm using a build that doesn't allow me to get all 5 stacks of Element Honing off at the same time. You may have noticed in all my infinite yapping, I have strategically ignored one single perk, that perk being Chain Reaction. I think if you're using Chain Reaction on this weapon, Mint Retrograde, you have a fundamental misunderstanding of what Mint Retrograde is used for. It is a pulse rifle first and foremost. It shoots rockets second, whereas rocket-assisted sidearms shoot rockets first and are a sidearm second. This is not a add clear weapon that you're going to want to throw chain reaction on and clear out a bunch of shit. It doesn't have, even though it says it has a 72 blast radius in the API, if you actually use this thing, you'll find out very, very quickly that it does not have a strong enough blast radius. So some would say, oh, just use chain reaction. You're going to finish that. The chain reaction damage you're going to be getting, I feel, is inconsequential compared to what this weapon is capable of. And if it behaved more like a grenade launcher, or if it behaved more like a rocket launcher, rather, I could see a use for chain reaction. But as it stands right now, I think that anybody using chain reaction just doesn't understand what this gun is good for, and that is shooting a that's just shooting a big beefy target, shooting a boss, shooting a champion, shooting any master plus 5 feet level activity enemies. If something has a shit ton of health and it needs to die, chain reaction is not going to be the difference maker. The other perks in column are going to be the difference maker, specifically elemental honing. But, like I said, you also have your other options in Bane Switch, Master of Arms, and One for All. And besides that, Hatchling, I don't think anybody should be using hatchling. That's just my personal opinion. Hatchlings have been nerfed into the ground since I believe the beginning of Final Shape. Hatchlings have kind of been garbage in all activities, so I really wouldn't use it. But at the end of the day, my preferred role, not for ammo economy, not for I guess like more effective damage rotations, just ease of use. Beacon rounds, elemental honing. You're going to be getting the most bang for your buck with this roll, but like I said, there is very, very little that you can that you can go wrong with on Mint Retrograde. There's so much good with it that any of the alleged quote unquote bad it's just not going to be consequential. Now, looking at the weapon mods, pretty much, in my opinion, with your Masterwork, you're going to either want handling or you're going to want velocity. It really doesn't matter. You can't go wrong with either. You really can't go wrong with anything besides blast radius and stability. Reload speed helps, handling helps, velocity helps. Pick your poison. I wouldn't throw away what I consider to be a quote-unquote god roll, right? If it has the beacon rounds and elemental honing, if it has a bad Masterwork, I would just live with it until I got another with a good Masterwork, that being, velocity or handling. And for the actual mods, abundant ammo, back a mag. Those are the only two things I would consider. And besides that, yeah, it's a lot of words to say what I simply should have from the beginning. Mint Retrograde is by far the best weapon in the entire game right now. There isn't any legendary that even remotely competes in terms of effectiveness. If you can get any roll, even getting a roll which I would consider to be the least optimal roll in the game, that being hashing chain reaction, even if you got it with hashing and chain reaction, I would still use it. That's how strong this thing. And it only gets even stronger as you actually get to the true quote unquote god rolls. But like I said, it really depends on your playstyle. I'm going to have multiple of these, the multiple of these that I'm going to chase tier 5, or at least have one tier 5 that has multiple rolls. If I can get one of these that has beacon rounds, rewind rounds, and either stats for all envious arsenal and in comp 4, if I can get it to have elemental honing, slice, and chain reaction, I think that that would be the best possible scenario. But there's a lot of grinding. There's a lot of grinding until we can get to that part, and this thing is only farmable in the Pinnacle Ops playlist. And if you didn't miss it, I had a video yesterday come out showcasing the Kel's Fall farm, but unfortunately, in 15 minutes from now, that is going to be no longer. So whenever you see this in rotation as the featured weapon to bonus farm in the Pinnacle Ops playlist, play that mission until you actually collapse, because until you have a good one, tier 4 or tier 4 and above, there's just really nothing else. Like, Mint Retrograde is true happiness. And with that being said, I want to thank y'all for watching. Thank you for listening to me speak for almost 20 minutes if I didn't cut anything out. And have a great day.